Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a very special and very different Navis Nobilite video. Today, I wanted to talk about a topic that's been kind of rattling around my head for a bit, especially since I've been doing so many fleet engagements, and I wanted to talk about the elements of the game that a lot of people try to view as overpowered, or in many cases are absolutely convinced that these are broken and need to be fixed. I'm also going to talk about the nature of the Battlefleet Gothic rule set and how hard it is to change anything. So this is going to be a lot of speculation, this is going to be a lot of opinion, this is going to be a little bit of history, and it's going to be a far more conversational video. So if you're bored with this kind of crap, go over and watch the fleet engagement of the lore videos, which, yes, more are coming out. Things are just very busy in my life right now. So let's begin with first things first. We're talking about the rules. So we have to talk about the situations that are involved when it comes to actually changing the rules. Because nobody likes to hear a long list of complaints without some kind of resolution in hand. So first things first, changing the rules of BFG are extraordinarily difficult. In fact, they are designed to be that way by the very community itself. It is very, 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 very hard to get anything actually changed. It is even harder to get things fixed, as strange as that may seem. Now, things have been fixed since 2010, and in fact, relatively recently, a oversight in rules that were designed in 2010 was brought forward, and it will be changed and fixed and put into the Fleet List Remastered. We'll go into it. But what does it take to actually get something changed? Well, first things first, a rule has to be presented that actually is contrary to the purpose of its writing. So a rule that basically, for example, let's say a system or a rule says one thing in one spot and another thing in another spot in respect to the same exact thing, that has to be fixed. Hence a rules clarification. That's why there are a couple of FAQs that actually came out after 2010 to help solve some of these issues. But if there's the case of a rule that is as written renders a fleet impossible to use, that's another example of something that can, and thankfully is, going to be fixed. Now, this means that if you encounter a problem that has been created by the fan base, namely something in the 2010 FAQ, that is quote unquote playable, but it is not in the intent that it was meant to be played, changing it is virtually impossible, because what has to happen first is you have to convince enough of the bitter old bastards of the hobby, like myself, like Horizon, and you have to convince them, and then you have to get a presumptive rule set that is basically a fixed version of what needs to be done. Then you have to get that new rule set in front of the High Lords, the High Admiralty, which is a group of 3 guys who are the custodians of the rule set. And all 3 of them, ideally, have to agree on it. Now, they have lives, they've long since walked away from Battlefleet Gothic, so generally speaking, you can sometimes get maybe 2, maybe 1. I don't know what the actual limit is, but I figure it's a majority thumbs up to have anything fixed. Now, the consequences of that is, like I said, it's very hard to get anything changed. And there are some problems that do exist, and they all exist mostly from the 2010 FAQ era, like the very poor writing of the Orc plans, the myriad problems that exist with Battlefleet Baka, and the Grey Knight Space Marine, which thankfully the lattermost is, yes, being fixed and will be put into the Fleet List Remastered once the custodian of the Fleet List Remastered has time, which unfortunately he generally doesn't. But thankfully, I will have linked below the new Grey Knights list It is a very minor difference, but the difference makes the fleet actually usable. So I wanted to, now that we've gone over the limitations of what we can change, I wanted to talk about the things that people generally and regularly regard as being broken. And are they really broken, or have these people just not found a solution tactically to their problem? Now, Battlefleet Gothic is not like other base mini games, and it is not like any other Games Workshop game. This means that it does not follow the same expected conventions that you would anticipate out of such a game. Namely, some races will have problems facing off against certain things. They will have advantages facing off against others. It is up to the players to find solutions to their tactical deficit, almost as if all of these races are very different. An Eldar player has to find a solution to 60 centimeter batteries. It may not be taking the Void Stalker in a couple of games, and instead relying more on fast moving, highly defensible escorts, which the Eldar escorts generally are. But we'll get to the Eldar later. Let's talk about the number one bugaboo that has been around since the dawn of the hobby, and that is the Nova Cannon. Is the Nova Cannon broken? Is it overpowered? And there's going to be a little bit of context involved. Now, I've gone over the rules of the Nova Cannon, but I'll give you a quick pretense. A vessel with a Nova Cannon can place the Nova Cannon template, or which is the same size, which is the bearing compass template if you have the old counters, anywhere in its front arc, so long as it is outside of 30 centimeters, and then you roll scatter, depending on the range, the number of scatter dice. If you hit with a direct hit, it's D6 automatic hits to the vessel. If you hit with the blast, it's 1 automatic hit with the vessel. Now, individually, this weapon is obviously unreliable because you use the scatter dice. It is meant to be unreliable. But then again, you still have a 1 in 3 chance of a direct hit. And I think anybody who's played against people with a Imperial Navy fleet with more than one Nova Cannon knows the frustration of, oh, I missed with this Nova Cannon, here's the next one on the same target. Yeah, it does get very frustrating because free hits in BFG are rare, and BFG does not really lend itself to the philosophy of model removal, which is pretty common in uh, a lot of other GW games. And also, people tend to love their minis a lot more than uh, any other hobby. But then again, it's pretty universal that people don't want to watch their beautiful, pretty little, super nicely painted ship just get removed in turn one, which does happen. So the question of overpowered nature of the Nova Cannon really comes to how many can you take. There is a unspoken convention across all of BFG that taking it more than 3 Nova Cannons in 1500 points, or more than 2 in 1000, is bad form. It is rude. It is the kind of thing that makes the Chaos player want to leap over the table and see how good their Desolator Battleship is as a shiv. But is it overpowered? That's a very important question. And for certain fleets, it may seem so. Good example, if I'm playing against the old school Tau, who predominantly use things like merchants and explorers, it feels overpowered because explorers are, as any Imperial Navy player will tell you, the very first thing that they shoot with the Nova Cannon. Partially because it's a 230 point launch capacity 8 carrier and there's going to be a lot of them, and if they want any chance of winning, they have to knock out the carrier capacity somehow. Also, it has 1 shield, which makes Nova Cannons particularly useful against it. Also, but something to consider. Say my enemy is taking 4 Nova Cannons. What good are those against the Eldar? The answer is not very. So it's fleet by fleet dependent. So would they be considered to be overpowered? Well, the ability to effectively delete or at least cripple a ship, when you start taking 4 or 5 or even 6 Nova Cannons every round, that's really, really annoying. And there's not a lot that the opponent can do about it except brace for impact. And it's even worse when you brace for impact and all of them scatter off doing nothing. And suddenly that ship, which is usually a valuable ship, can't do much that round. So what do? What are the options that you have? And is it overpowered? From my experience, knowing that I've used Nova Cannons a lot, and generally speaking, I played a lot of Imperial Navy. They're one of my favorite fleets. I'm going to say calmly that on the scale of, 1 to 10, on the overpowered scale, with 1 being ever so slightly overpowered, and 10 being we need to fix this now, I give it only about a 2 on the overpowered scale. The reason being is there are a lot of solutions against Nova Cannons. If you're playing Chaos, the way you beat the Nova Cannon fleet is to utilize your better speed. You getting close where the Nova Cannon isn't useful. Yes, you have to go through that 30 centimeter to 45 centimeter band where it's a really high chance you're going to get smacked in the face. But Nova Cannon wielding ships are generally pretty weak in firepower. You have the Tyrant, Strength 10 weapons battery only on the port and starboard. You have the Dominator, which is the most powerful of them all, which can only be taken in 1 fleet. And it's 12 on a weapons battery. You have the Lunar, 6 lances and 6 batteries, 2 lances. You have and then you have the Armageddon, which is insanely expensive if they take a Nova Cannon on it. It's an inefficient Nova Cannon platform, but you can take it, which does have a Strength 6 weapon battery and the 4 lance broadside thanks to its 2 dorsal lances. And you have the Mars, which has a Strength 6 weapon battery and 2 dorsal lances. These ships are easily outgunned by your basic baseline cruisers. Slaughters will make them pay for thinking that they can stay far away from you. So use your escort. A group of infidels can ruin the day of a Nova Cannon ship because, 1, infidels are not that great of a target for Nova Cannons, and if you separate them out early and then collect them together later for a large salvo, not all of them may survive the approach. But if they do, or if at least enough of them do, you can knock out a Nova Cannon using ship by crippling it with enough torpedoes, or making it brace, in which case it can't use Nova Cannon. Also, don't forget, as a Chaos player at least, you have Dreadclaws, you have assault boats. If we want to talk about the other fleets that are particularly susceptible to them, we're talking Tyranids, 100% are susceptible to Nova Cannons, and you have Tau, specifically the older Tau, but the newer Tau also tend to have this problem, though their battleships have more shields. I would say that Necrons do suffer against the Nova Cannon, but all of these fleets have solutions. So Tyranids, what's their solution? You may end up losing either your cruiser or your hive ship, but that's really not where the strength of your fleet lies. The strength of your fleet lies in your escorts. You need to swarm the map with lots of gribbly little bits and eat them with the escorts. Feeder tentacles are your friend. Giant claws are your friend. You should be using them. Yes, you will not walk out of the fight with your hive ship probably intact. It is the biggest target. So use that as a distraction. Let them shoot it. Have an emergency hive ship on standby doing other things. For Tau, yes, it is a significant problem, but at the same time, it is the Imperial Navy's solution to your own particular breed of overpowered bullshit, namely the Explorer, which we will get to later. For Necrons, it is one of the few solutions to your own overpowered bullshit, which we'll get to later. But also, you have more speed than Chaos. If your problem is a Nova Cannon, you have the best shot of getting inside that band than almost any other fleet in the game. So, it is important as a player to realize that you have to think flexibly. Yes, Nova Cannons, when people start taking like 4 or 5 of them, it becomes a headache. but you do have options. And the fact that the community itself has decided that it is poor form to take so many does help. Our community does have a pretty good job of policing one another in the don't be a dick area. But even still, I would happily play against somebody who's just like, I'm taking 7 Dominators in a fleet. My answer is, awesome. I'll play Chaos, and I'm going to eat you. Because while you will probably be deleting a ship around, I have so many fast-moving cruisers that can get within that band that even if half my fleet is crippled, when I'm inside the band, I am going to pound the fertilizer out of you. So, also, Eldar, basically ignore the Nova Cannon. It doesn't do a lot against them. That hollow field is a great thing. All right. The next thing that people tend to accuse of being broken are the Necrons. Now, the Necrons are, this is a very, very old mentality. Sorry, I have to get all the way to the Necron section. This is a very old mentality that has existed since the Necrons came out. And this is actually more due to a misconception of what it means to fight Necrons and what you are actually trying to do. Because the Necrons are not meant to be approached in the same way that the other fleets are. On a scale of 1 to 10 of the broken scale, I give the Necrons a 0. They are not broken. Winning as Necrons is actually extraordinarily difficult the moment that my opponent reads the rules in the Necron section. Because once they see that, they know exactly what they need to do to beat me. What beats Necrons? Any form of land. What beats Necrons? Assault, a hit and run attacks. Boarding. I have so many weaknesses in the Necron fleet that it can and it will, beat the brakes off me. Necrons, unfortunately, are about as balanced as they're ever going to get. Here are some of the reasons. Number 1, the critical hits table for the Necrons is very punishing. Yes, it doesn't do a lot of damage to them, but it does disable a lot of all of the things that are incredibly important to the ship. And that will make life a living hell, even if it's easier for them to repair. The other thing you have to consider is that destroying an enemy ship doubles its victory points. Any capital ship that is destroyed, but not left as a drifting hulk, counts as 200% destroyed. Any capital ship that is destroyed, but is a drifting hulk, is 300% victory point. This means that simply killing a side is a ridiculous amount of points. It's 550 points for killing a scythe. That is the same as a upgraded Cairn Tomb ship. As the Necron player, if I lose a scythe, I now have to kill about 3 ships in order to even out the victory points discrepancy. That is very hard for Necrons. So, as a Necron player, yes, I have incredible firepower. I have insane abilities to destroy the enemy. But if I lose even a single cruiser, it is insanely painful. So remember that, yes, you're going to be going up against a Necron player, and you're going to lose a lot of ships. But as the Imperial or Chaos or any other race's player, your sole interest is to destroy not the enemy tomb ship, but their harvest ships and their shroud. Because these are all worth more points than, are worth more than just as listed. And if you do destroy the tomb ship, the game's over. Every other fleet, if I lose a battleship, I can keep fighting. If the Cairn tomb ship is destroyed, the game is over. That's 1,000 points or 1,100 points that I now have to make up with a very limited fleet. I may have 2 or 3 sides. I'm probably not going to make a victory out of that. So, are Necrons overpowered? No, they're not. Necrons are about as balanced as you can get. But yeah, they are, I would call them weird in balance, but they are balanced. It's a little like having a brick on one end and a 10,000 pennies on the other side of the scale, but it still balances itself out. The next thing I'm going to talk about is probably predictable. The Eldar. Are the Eldar broken? Now this is I'm going to have to separate this out into the individual fleet, namely Corsair, Craft World, and then the Dark Eldar, who are very, very different beasts. Are the Eldar for Corsair and Craft World broken? No, but because they break all of the rules in the way that they play, that is it's a difficult thing to explain. So it is very frustrating when you're playing with a fleet that has good against literally everything else in the game except Eldar, and that 2-up save is so incredibly frustrating. But they have a lot of balancing factors that mitigate the problem. Yes, Pulsar Lances can do an insane amount of damage if I hit with the first one. If I don't hit with the first one, they're just like any other missed lance. I don't get to roll for more. So, what about my batteries? Are my batteries, overpowered? Well, they always count as closing, which is really handy. But if your armor is already 6 up, then I'm not doing a whole lot against you. So, are they overpowered? Kinda. No, not really. Because what's the balancing factor? Well, Eldar ships are built like tinfoil. Their armor in the Corsair list is 4 up. Their armor in the Craft World list is 5 up, which is better, significant. But, unfortunately, every time I take a hit, it's a 4 or better to crit. And the Eldar critical hits table is incredibly punishing. And all of their damages are all of the damage is severe and crippling, because instead of having port and starboard divided weapons like a lot of the other ships in the game, everything is concentrated into prow and keel. And all of the damages that involve movement are enough sometimes to just guarantee the destruction of the ship. So, also they have an additional critical hit value that causes additional damage to the ship, namely the roll of the 9, which will cause infinity circuits to smash. Now, you can't set them on fire normally, which is nice, but the consequences of superstructure damage is still very severe. So, the final balancing factor ultimately is that all of their ships are very expensive, and they are very, what's a good way to put it? Their firepower is heavily concentrated in them. So they're expensive, but they cannot afford to lose them. And they have very few hits. The Eldar battleship has 10 hits. The standard Eldar cruiser has 6 hits. There's only one Eldar ship in the official game that has 8 hits, and that's Uriel's flagship. And let's talk about how effective Uriel has ever proven for me in a battle. Namely, he is only good at missing things. He really is the cursed one. So, for the players who claim that Eldar are broken, you need to realize that every single fleet in the game has an answer to the Eldar. Every single one. There is not a single answer, not a single fleet that doesn't have something that can give the Eldar a black eye. It's a matter of using it appropriately. Yes, the answer is, unironically, overwhelm them with holofield saves. One roll of a 1 can destroy the Eldar's prospects of winning the game if the crit is bad enough. And just because they're really, really good at navigating stellar phenomena doesn't necessarily mean they're always going to make that roll. Can't tell you how many times I've failed that roll, even when I have the reroll. The other problems is that if the other player knows how they move and react to to the sun, you can take advantage of that and force the Eldar into a corner and beat the brakes off of them. You can show them what happens when you actually are forced into a knockdown, drag-out fight. If they go into an asteroid field, follow them in. Yeah, you may take some damage from the rock, nowhere near as much damage as they're going to take when you're shooting at them at close range. So, yeah, you are not walking out of the fight without black eyes, but the Eldar are going to come out of it way worse than you are. Are the Eldar broken from a scale of 1 to 10? My answer is no. No, they're not. You cannot build a fleet that is solely based on lances or Nova cannons against them. But if you have a nice balanced fleet with a good amount of weapons, batteries, lances, and launch capacity, you can beat the Eldar. There is no fleet that cannot do it. Now, the next thing that we're going to go into are probably something that a lot of people are aware of. The Tau Empire, and specifically the glory that is the Explorer battleship. Now, why do people view the Explorer battleship as broken? Well, it is a launch capacity 8 battleship that is 230 points. This is cheaper than many cruisers in the game. And what do you get? You get a lot. Yeah, you have a piddly little strength 6 weapons battery, but you get, launch capacity 8 for Barracudas and Mantas, and the grab hook. You also, and this is what most people really do view as being truly broken, you have the Gallia option, which gives you the gravitic launcher in exchange for launch capacity 4, which is a lot of gravitic launchers. There's an awful lot of them. So the other reason why they're viewed as being incredibly broken is that there is no limitations on the number you can take, which is pretty ridiculous. Any number of Explorer battleships. So people can play a 500-point game, and it wouldn't be actually. Let me see. What are the requirements? Yeah, you can play a 500-point game and bring 2 Explorers, which has kind of the same effect as taking more than 3 Nova cannons in a 1,500-point game. There is this overpowered. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would say it's maybe about a 3. It does allow the Tau player to effectively dominate the ordnance phase in ways that pretty much no other fleet can do, and it really is amplified in the smaller games where the opponent really doesn't have the flexibility to bring things that can counter this. Now, the reason why I'm only giving it a 3 is that the moment you start growing in size of the match, the strengths of the Explorer start to diminish and the strengths of the opponent begin to grow. Like, for example, I am playing a 1,500-point lit. I am Imperial Navy, which is the standard operating procedure to assume I'm fighting against Explorer heavy fleet. My answer is I'm going to take a bunch of Nova cannons, because these things are consummate Nova cannon based. If I'm playing against Chaos, I'm going to utilize the advantage I have with my very flexible and large numbers of effective, very long range weapons on my carriers. I'll start bringing things like Sixes, Devastation. I'll bring a Despoiler, and while I will not be able to beat them, I will be able to mitigate their effectiveness while beating them up at long range, because, quite frankly, a 45-centimeter strength 6 weapons battery ain't going to do jack against a long-range oriented Chaos fleet. If I'm playing against Orcs, I'm not that worried, because I can build a fleet with a ton of Fight-A-Bombers, which can counter a lot of their ordnance, and I'll just move in and board the hell out of them. I don't care if some of my kill cruisers or terrorists die. That's what they're meant to do. They're bombs in space that happen to have orcs on top of them. When you start dealing with these small volume fleets, like the Eldar, like the Necrons, this does actually kind of become a bit more of a problem, because I am focusing a lot more of my fleet investment in individual ships, and it's far less distributed. Eldar actually have a lot of problems against this kind of fleet, despite their holofield advantage. Holofields only go so far when I'm facing like 16 waves of bombers because my carrier ship didn't have enough capacity to knock out or slow down their stuff. Now, if I'm playing Craft World, I do have the advantage of my Shadow Hunters, which are actually a great solution to the Explorer problem, because I could re-roll my holofields whenever they're attacked by attack craft. So if you are playing Craft World, use your Shadow Hunters against them. It's super effective. Playing with Necrons, you have to take the advantage, if you can, of getting in close and annihilating them with your firepower. You have a significant weakness because you don't have anything that can really get rid of incoming enemy ordnance that well. Even the Star Pulse Generator may not be enough. So you have to be more surgical. It's actually a tough matchup. So the Explorer, yeah, but it is a problem, but only in the smallest of games. The Explorer torpedo spam method did win a couple of Adepticon tournaments, and then people started learning how to beat them. So bear that in mind. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about are the Dark Eldar. Now, are the Dark Eldar overpowered? This is another one of those weird situational problems, because in a prolonged battle, no, the Dark Eldar actually have a significant number of problems in prolonged battles, but in certain scenarios, they actually have some pretty ridiculous advantages. So in one-off battles, the Dark Eldar are effectively, as I stated in my videos about them, they're bottle rockets with bazookas. If they are in the fight for too long, they will end up getting destroyed. If they are able to get in, surgically destroy something, and then get the hell out before they die, they can win matches. But there are certain campaign missions that are uniquely designed for Dark Eldar to win because of the nature of the Mimic Engine. A Dark Eldar ship can Mimic Engine in, annihilate its target ship, and then disengage and win the scenario, really before the defending player has any opportunity to stop them. So beyond that, the Dark Eldar don't really have a lot of options to be overpowered. Their ships are build-a-ships, but they're okay. They get one cruiser, they have one escort. They can do a lot of damage in a single round if nothing impedes it. They do have some of the standard weaknesses of the Eldar, but they aren't critted on a roll of a 4. They're critted on a roll of a 6. Their biggest weakness is that their cruiser is only 6 hits, and their escort only has 4 up armor. So, are Dark Eldar overpowered? I have to give 2 answers for this. In campaigns, I give it maybe a 3 out of 10. Or, no, maybe I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Because they are the best raider faction in the game. They are designed to torture people in those smaller engagements. In a one-off game or any larger battle, it's a 0 out of 10. They can be beaten, and they do suffer problems when they are forced into a protracted battle. So, if you're in a campaign and you have a Dark Eldar player, everybody should be bullying the Dark Eldar player for good and sufficient reason. But it's the only thing they ultimately can do, because they're not that good at anything else. They are a very specialized faction in that area. All right, this is going to be the last thing that I'm going to go over. And the reason why I'm doing this last is because I recently encountered this problem in a couple of games, and I've been having this problem for quite some time ever since the 2010 FAQ. are Space Marines overpowered? Now, this may seem like a really weird thing to say, because, wait, Space Marines overpowered? What? You know, they're a fleet that everyone regards as being underpowered, not realizing that not this year, but last year, the Space Marine fleet won the Adepticon tournament by a very large margin. And the reason is specifically the modifications that were made to the Strike Cruiser. And that specific modification is the additional shield for 15 points. Now, a shield on a ship with 6-up armor all around is worth so much more than a shield on a ship with 5-up armor on the side and rear, because it is already such a pain in the ass to actually cause significant damage to a strike cruiser. If you have weapons batteries, you are flailing, you are hoping for that good roll. And let's say you have a group of ships that fire on a strike cruiser, and you get I actually had this happen in a game where I had 2 murders and a Hades firing a strength 30 weapons battery at a strike cruiser within 15. I rolled an insane amount of dice, and 2 of those hits. 2 of the dice hit. But if the vessel were, say, another Chaos vessel or any ship with 5-up armor, like an Emperor, the vessel would be completely destroyed. And you have to sit there and wonder, why does a 160, in the case of that ship, why does a 160-point vessel have greater resiliency than a battleship? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Also, the upgrades given to the options for firepower of these vessels are very, very, very strong. And bring up the question not necessarily as a point of these guys are unbeatable. They are, if you are prepared and you know what to do. But Space Marines were never meant to be an effective space fighting force. Giving them the ability to fight in this regard as an effective space fighting force is contrary to the lore of the setting. Now, lore changes, lore has changed, but when it gets to the point where a strike cruiser, the 160-point strike cruiser, is more effective than a 220-point carrier, combat carrier on the Imperial Navy, in terms of durability and effectiveness and capacity to fight, that's a problem. Because if I had the choice between a Dominator cruiser and a strike cruiser, I'll take the strike cruiser every time. It's faster, it's more maneuverable, it's harder to kill, it has launch capacity, virtually the same, not technically, but technically a Thunderhawk, 2 Thunderhawks count as 3, launch capacity 3, but the official rules view them as being worth 4. And it has either the exact same, you can replace your launch base for the same torpedo strength, or you can take up a strength 8 bombardment cannon in the prow, which is more than enough to break open any ship that any ship that it fires. It doesn't matter about the facing, because they automatically hit on a 4. So, are Space Marines as a fleet broken? I give it, from a scale of 1 to 10, situational. If you know how to abuse this list, this fleet will be more powerful than it is supposed to be. I would actually give this about a 5 out of 10. Because if you encounter a fleet in 1,500 points of 7 strike cruisers, okay? 4 of them, they're normal with Thunderhawks. The other 3 have bombardment cannon prows. There's not a lot of fleets that can do a whole lot against them. Even Eldar have problems fighting against them. Necrons will get tabled by that fleet. The only fleets that really would be able to take that on are maybe Imperial Navy and a very, very skilled Chaos player who knows how to use their range to their advantage. But yeah, I would give the Space Marines a solid 5 out of 10 on the overpowered scale. They're beatable, but somebody actually made this important point. If an upgrade is an automatic take with overpower, that makes a certain level of sense. If you take a strike cruiser and without thinking pay 160 points just to take that second shield, then it means that's undercosted. There is no debate in the value of this ability. Ultimately, this probably should be closer to 25 points in and the bombardment cannon option should have a cost, because strength 2 launch phase is so much. Yeah, the firepower 5 bombardment cannon is worth so much more than the strength 2 launch phase. If there was not the restriction on taking the classic strike cruiser, which into and itself is a great ship, everybody would just take the bombardment cannon option. There would be no standard options. So, and frankly, I have never seen anybody take the torpedo option. I've never seen it. In all my years, I have never seen somebody take that torpedo option. It's always the bombardment cannon. Because quite frankly, between the two options, the bombardment cannon's the better choice. Torpedoes are unreliable. Bombardment cannons are super reliable. So, yeah, the Space Marines as a fleet, not necessarily super unbalanced, but the strike cruiser as it stands now probably should be reviewed for point adjustment. There really should be a changing cost for the bombardment cannon. It should be probably a 10-point upgrade, and the additional shield option needs to be like 25 points. Ships have to be more expensive for what they do. I'm not saying that you should change that they can get them. No, it needs to be more expensive. You have to pay more for it in order to get these upgrades. So that's the overview. Now, when you think about going back over all of the things that I just discussed, think about how little that the level of minutia I had to dig into to explain the overpowered nature of these. These all have solutions to be beaten. They can all, your best laid plan can fail catastrophically with one failed leadership. So recognize that I had to dig really hard to find these power discrepancies in the game. And overall, there's only one thing that actually got like to a 5 out of 10 on the overpowered scale. We aren't all going to suffer in unending agony if the strike cruiser is not adjusted at its power level, right? If the points aren't adjusted, it does mean that there is something out there that people can exploit, and what we're trying to avoid is the necessity of list tailoring. We don't want people to go, oh, that guy's bringing a Space Marine fleet, I'm bringing 18 Gothics to solve the problem, which would solve the problem, but it's not the best and most conducive for fun game. So to sum it up, how would I fix the Nova Cannon? Well, there are a couple of solutions that have been offered for the Nova Cannon. Some people have said it can only be fired if you reload. Not entirely against it. That actually, I think, is the best solution. But it hurts the Imperial Navy in smaller games where you can really only take like one. And binding the Nova Cannon to the reload special order is... I don't know if that is going too far. Because it also means that if you're playing a game and there's a radiation burst and the sun hates you, see my battle that I play with my Grey Knights, you're not firing the Nova Cannon. The Nova Cannon, I would say, is not reliable enough of a weapon to require a reload for a balancing measure. But it wouldn't break the game, but it would significantly weaken the Imperial Navy, which I'm not entirely sure is necessary. Now, if someone were to come to me, and I think I made this point in another video, what is the most overpowered fleet? I would say the Imperial Navy, solely because they have so many solutions and so many options. they have more upgrades than anyone else. But it's not. It's such a minuscule level of advantage that nobody really believes it's an advantage. How would I fix the other thing? So how would I fix the Tau? There's really not a lot you can do. You could put a restriction on the Explorer based on point value, which, I mean, wouldn't necessarily harm the fleet, but it wouldn't necessarily help the issue either, because if you make it 1 for every 500 points, you're still running into the same issues, because, all right, most people bring 2 Explorers in matches between, 1,000 and 1,500 points anyway. So, okay, in the very small games, you can only bring 1. All right, well, then you're going to have to deal with all the problems of all of the other ships they're going to bring, because they're pretty ridiculous too. What else? Necrons. There's really nothing to fix about Necrons. I don't believe that they're broken. If you think they are broken, explain it to me down in the comments below, by all means. Eldar, how would I fix the Eldar? That's a hard thing for me to answer too. The Corsair and Craft Ruled Eldar, I don't consider to be broken. I view them actually as a very high finesse fleet. They may actually do better to have things that make them more resilient, because having your entire fleet sold because of one hit to your ship, to your mothership, kind of ruins the game for a lot of Eldar players. How would I fix the Dark Eldar? That's actually something I can answer. A rule that states you cannot disengage in the first 2 rounds of any battle. That right there is enough, because the Dark Eldar have to get close, and they will have to suffer a couple of rounds of fire before they can start trying to make an escape. And I would even say that due to their nature for the use of drugs and the pleasure of the fight, they are going to suffer negatives to their leadership in order to disengage. They should have reasons to stay, not an incentive to leave. I've already mentioned what I would do to fix the Space Marines, which is increase the, make a point cost for the bombardment cannon and increase the cost of the shield. Space Marines, by the very writing in these books, are not meant to be a space combat fleet. They are a glorified troop transport fleet. The only reason why they are good at space combat is because they're Space Marines. They literally can take a shitty situation and make it amazing. Also, a lot of the weaknesses of their fleet were completely obliterated by the Rules Edition of Venerable Battle Barges. The ability to take any Imperial ship or Chaos ship as a Venerable Battle Barge is a bit of a mistake, and I think that should be heavily limited. I think that they should be restricted to baseline cruisers on the Chaos side, the Repulsive Grand Cruiser. Yes, give them something nice. And on the Imperial side, baseline cruiser and Imperial battleships, with the exception the Apocalypse. Make it hard for them to get lances. Make it hard for them to get Nova cannons. Make it hard for them to get additional launch capacity. They can have some nice stuff. It's not all of the nice stuff. Obviously, that's subject to discussion, and that this is just an idea off the top of my head. But Venerable Battle Barges are too much of a solution to the gaps in the Space Marine fleet. All right. Thank you all so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you again in the next video. Bye-bye.